Go.
Red border. And live. Good morning. I think we're live. Yes, we can start. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and welcome to this chat. We're going to be discussing the business case for ESG and carbon-related disclosures today. Thanks to our hosts, Mazars and Bureau Veritas, for having us. Just a little bit about me. I've been very kindly invited to modulate this conversation by Bongiwe from Mazars. I've been very fortunate to work with her over the last few months. And I represent a company called Kudos One. We are an ESG assessment online tool, an automated system that does ESG assessments on companies, particularly SMEs. And this conversation is obviously very interesting to me because I feel that there's been a little bit of a bridge between carbon disclosures and more traditional ESG reporting. I'm really looking forward to learning from the two experts we have with us today. So just to start off with, I think we're going to hear from Bongiwe first, and just by way of introduction, I'd like to say that Bongiwe Mbunge specializes in business strategies, value creation, focused unique value propositions through engagements of business with their key stakeholders. Business sustainability is presented to focus on the interconnectedness of economic efficiencies, social equity, and environmental accountability. Bongiwe has a lot to share. I've learned so much from her over the last 6 months, and I'm sure you guys will too in the next few minutes. Over to you, Bongiwe. I think your microphone might be off.
Correct. Apologies for that. Thank you for that kind introduction, Carl, and good morning to everyone. It is really a privilege for us to be talking all things sustainability. And this morning, we have the opportunity of looking at it through the lens of ESG. And as I get started, I really want to say that from a strategic imperative, it's quite important for us to know a few things in the sustainability conversation. Number one is that ESG itself focuses on the environmental, social, and governance aspects. It's definitely an important outlet for the bigger sustainability conversation. I just want to kick it off with the words of Larry Fink, to say to prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to the society. And without a sense of purpose, no company, either public or private, can reach its full potential. It will ultimately lose the license to operate from its key stakeholders. And I think there are a few things that I would like to highlight from that. Definitely that the time that we are emerging from in terms of a hard lockdown, the intensity of the effects of the pandemic that we have experienced, it's no doubt that ESG has been interfaced a lot in the economic front and really looked at as something that could be used as a lever for resilience and actually to see businesses thrive. But what I want to say is that we have the opportunity and the privilege to fully understand how to measure financial performance, how to have that conversation, set standards that have been used over years. And yet when we lean over into the non-financial information, that's where perhaps the rubber meets the road in terms of our ability to interface corporate strategy fully integrated into ESG. And that's what one of the things that I would like us to cover this morning as we look through it. So really on a broad integration level, it has got to influence positively your ability to assess your risk. And the ability to assess non-financial risk is sometimes left on its own, and we hope that it will be able to sort itself out. But why should we as business leaders leave it to chance or opportunity instead of being quite proactive about it? But I want to say that I will spend quite a few minutes on the business case and unpacking that so that it's quite clear for us when we venture into non-financial information practices, strategic intent, and risk assessment. We are not only saying, can businesses do what is good for business to do? And we leave it there. We have got to demonstrate how this adds value back onto the bottom line. And that is being done through the lens of understanding the business case for all that it stands for. But I do want to say that in the conversation of ESG, in the conversation of sustainability, what's quite pertinent to understand is that we need to clarify the role of stakeholder engagement, because that is potentially where we do not use it to the utmost. And this is where we lose a lot of value as we are, as we engage. So if you have a think of your key stakeholders and who those are, from internal to external to sideways, one of the things that we hone in on that has got to be fully understood is the ability to know as a business, number one, am I engaging at the right level in terms of the stakeholder that I have? Am I clear as to what the value that my business hopes to unlock with that stakeholder? And fundamentally, number three, do I have a strategy to unlock that value? Because if that question is no, then we know that there are some efficiencies and some relationships that can be far improved. So when we look at the business case of ESG, and we really lean in on the building and maintaining of trust with key stakeholders, that's quite important, because once you have that, you want to have a business comprised of a management executive team with its people fully behind them and on one page. And once you have the strength of that, the vision becomes clearer and it's shared. And you know that as a business, you have the ability to unlock all that you can from your employees. So the lens of ESG has got to be able to prove to business how it improves the competitive edge, and the point of differentiation becomes even more critical once we are in fully emerging out of the recovery phase of COVID-19. But what I've seen that is quite unique, not only in our context in South Africa, but globally, is how it further robustly develops your vision and strategy on a progressive level. And we have got good pressure that comes out of the younger workforce in terms of the attraction and the retention of employees. And people want to know, do I work for a business with a purpose? And is that purpose, are there a set of value systems aligned to me as a person? Because it's no longer about who has the ability to give me employment and it ends there. It's becoming a heightened conversation. Now, today, we will spend time, quite some time, looking at the efficiencies of what we can potentially get out of this. And what I can say about efficiencies, when we talk about lean and meaner processes, less waste, we're not only referring to your waste to landfill. We're not only referring to, do you have recycling covered as a business? We are also looking at all sorts of efficiencies, including the efficiency of time, including the maximization of using your resources to its max to actually unlock what you want to in the long term. So that is something that has got to be strategically driven and influenced from a top-down and a bottom-up approach. And we certainly know that through the introduction of carbon tax, 1 June 2019, we have seen what some people would interpret as a stick approach for businesses to get moving and to pay attention from this. But the way I can summarize it is that it is no longer sufficient for businesses to only be measured on their financial contribution, their balance sheet. We have got to have the urgency and the ability and the adaptability to interpret that non-financial component and holistically look at it so that we can assess our risk. I have seen a really improved conversation when it comes to financial services and looking at peers such as banks wanting to understand what is the holistic risk, because as soon as that is not understood, what you will see start to emanate from the transaction or whatever your need is to interface with the banking environment is that a misunderstood component of risk will increase, is likely to just increase your interest your interest rates that you are negotiating for. But from an international perspective, this is a slightly more mature conversation in terms of the requirements and how it interfaces with understanding climate change risks and really enabling the business to look at those and embrace it and saying, how do we interpret this for ourselves and how do we become better in executing what we have? What am I saying in a nutshell? In a nutshell, I'm saying that we have got to have you've got to have the consciousness to fully be aware of our impacts, not only in an economic sense, but also when it comes to the community on a broader level and the ability of that community to shift towards the desired direction, quite streamlining what our role and our intent of purpose around that is. And I'm going to use some case studies to clarify this, because this is a conversation that can seem like we've said so much, but where do I begin? What does it actually mean? And that I'm going to depict through some case studies for you. So please, as I proceed, just feel free to drop your questions as I go along into the Q&A chat, and Carl will pick them up and we will attend to them in the last 10-15 minutes of the session, which is the most critical, so that we can engage a little bit. So this, what we have in front of us now, is a study. I've just removed the entity names. It's a Pan-African entity, present in 23 countries with that kind of turnover, 508 million. And really what they had done is to take ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and fully integrate it into their operations and say, how will ESG improve or clarify our business? And how will we use this business strategy as a lever to better our engagements internally and externally? And how will we build the consciousness that we want to see, but more importantly, improve further down the line, so that we actually contribute to an agenda bigger than ourselves? So 3 high-level aspects that were uncovered there in terms of strategic issues: corporate governance, employee development, and there was an overall one. But as we can see from what the intervention has been, so there was an introduction of social and ethics transformation committee here in terms of the corporate governance, because that was lacking. In terms of the employee development, though, implementation of programs, development programs to foster, into the business, how people interpret their responsibilities, how they can be aided to grow, and how they can be basically use innovation to better what the business was already doing. But on an overall, as a strategic guidance, and a conversation sitting at an executive level, so that it can be frequently reviewed and spoken into, because the age of big strategic documents and days of a Boss Barad that reduces into nothing really tangible other than documents that collect dust, we start to see how this is pieced into small chunks, fed into existing meeting structures, and uses the operations to be fully integrated. For what we see as an outcome is really an adoption of the best practice in terms of corporate governance. And we don't need to look very far in the South African context to fully appreciate what good corporate governance structures actually aid the business in its best form. But also, in the employee development sphere, we also start to see sustainable job creation, not job creation that just interfaces with somebody getting employment that's not really meaningful, but we start to build sustainability into it. We look into supply chain efficiencies, and this is a big dark hole. Supply chain, we hope, as businesses and as big business, that we'll just hope that no skeletons comes out of the supply chain. But without intent and dedicated effort, it's just not going to get us there. So really starting to see an increase in terms of the EBITDA from 1.125 million and growing by 27% in terms of the revenue. That is the kind of impact analysis that we always want to see, because we want to be fully appreciative of the outcomes of what a strategy like this achieves for our businesses. So really also looking at a local context, and which I will speak over in a few minutes as I delve into this slide, is that from a local context perspective, somebody can be saying, is this conversation for big business, for listed entities entirely? But what does it mean for somebody who is an SME and hopes to integrate something like this? What is the proportion of value? Now, the number one factor that usually sits in the owner-managed, privately owned business space is that you have got somebody who's an entrepreneur, passionate about what they do, knows how to run a business, and over time, their attention and their time being roped into so much of the operational aspect that the strategic is left to its own. And that what that case study also covers for us is, how do you build capacity sustainably and make sure that the band of managers beneath you are empowered? There's transparent sharing of information to be able to guide their decision making, and there is accountability in terms of the feedback process. But certainly what we're going to spend the next presentation on is to delve into one thing. So where can we draw focus in terms of what we're looking at right now, in terms of from an environmental accountability perspective? So carbon footprinting is really a mechanism that aims to give back into the business. Many a times, we've been operating in South Africa without a carbon tax. We have been heavily reliant on the business leaders to be conscious enough and to exercise stewardship. It's been left on its own. Now, we've seen that the agenda has heightened from a United Nations perspective. We'll see that from the commitments that we too, South Africa, have made into the Paris Agreement, which Samuel will touch on. And we start then to see the localization of that on a business level, and saying, no longer will we not hold businesses accountable for the contribution that they have towards the depletion of natural resources. So carbon tax is actually trying to say, can we quantify what you emit into the atmosphere as a business? And then can we hold you accountable if you are emitting in excess of, so that we can have the opportunity to use that stick as a carrot and say, how can you achieve better efficiencies for yourself as a business as you improve along the conversation? So carbon footprinting can never be looked at in isolation. It has got to form part of the greater conversation of ESG. It has got to be looked at from all aspects, because truth be told, if few people who understand the conversation very well in business leadership do not have the ability to really shift, the trajectory that we are on without the greater mass that needs to be brought into the conversation. Let me quickly make an example for us in our own case study as Mazars in South Africa. So we started you will remember quite well that in 2018, the Western Cape was experiencing severe droughts. And we saw in Q1 of 2018, the inevitable announcement that day zero was unavoidable. Prior to that, all businesses were trying to polish up their business continuity plans. They're trying to map out how they are going to keep their doors open beyond a day zero kind of scenario. And in doing all of that, we suddenly became so alive to how interconnected our ecosystems are and the value that lies in it. And that was something that woke us up from a position of where we're sitting to where we found ourselves. But I want to share with us what we actually did from a Mazars Cape Town perspective when we were in the solution space of the draft. So first and foremost, we've got about 450 people in this office, and the building we are in is not a smart building. So we had to use what we have and start immediately. We used leadership and influence. So when we used leadership, education, and influence, we basically educated our employees on through our core value of stewardship in terms of saving from electricity to water. We turned off our taps, and we replaced water with sanitizers. We put up posters. We communicated, and we influenced. And through that intervention alone, we started off measuring our consumption. And 7 months down the line, we remeasured that consumption. And what we found was a decline of water usage by 60% and a decrease of electricity by 25%. And through a 7-month period of this, decisive leadership intervention, we then saved in excess of 250K straight to our bottom line by shifting behavior. But it doesn't only start from shifting behavior. It starts from education, it starts from intent, it starts from strategy, the clarity of strategy, and map that out into actionable items for ourselves, and then drive the consciousness. So I'm trying to say, where you have not measured what your footprint is, it's impossible for you to manage. You have got to start with the measurement, and nature is not exactly going to wait for all of us to get our act together. So my encouragement is for us, from a leadership perspective, to have got the ability to anticipate what is coming, and to anticipate and appreciate the risks that it could mean for our businesses as well, and get on to a conversation level whereby we start from the known to the unknown. So we've got the ability to provide you with those expert services in crafting and defining that strategic intent for you here in South Africa and a few of our member countries throughout our 91 that we have presence in, but also clarifying what their path not only in the short term looks like, but in the longer term. So in terms of looking at bigger businesses, and does this always mean that we're talking about massive budgets and large teams? Not necessarily. And this is where probably our hub of professionals comes into use, to say that we have the opportunity of understanding a privately owned business, a corporate, a listed enterprise, as well as a public enterprise, and adapt what we know to be a big conversation into chunks. So in the future, we will definitely be talking more about what does the ESG conversation look like for smaller, medium, and larger enterprises. So we've also, quite gone ahead and anticipated what could be meaningful and efficient for the businesses that we work with. And hence we have, in conjunction with Kudos One, developed a end-to-end technological tool that assesses your environmental, social, and governance, and really starts to give you an action plan and start to map out your journey as we move forward. Without a decisive strategy, it is not possible to shift internal behavior. It's not possible to strategically position ourselves in terms of our greater stakeholder community, and it is not possible for us to experience the exponential growth that we are wanting to tap into as businesses. Certainly, the future does look collaborative. It does interface with a lot of experts. It does mean that, no individual business should feel the isolation of not having a strategic partner that can be able to unpack non-financial information, to take them along the journey with them, and to actually break it down into understandable, pragmatic language. So what does it mean for my business? How am I going to measure this? And how am I going to drive this through? So what you see here is really laying out on a higher level to say that the frameworks that are there, in terms of, there are many frameworks, but our affiliation is closer to something that we know as the Global Reporting Initiative, that is quite practical for us. But also for bigger clients, we go with the integrated reporting model. What am I saying? I'm saying there's an opportunity for us to do what's good, what's right, but also to have the ability in our anticipating how we remodel our businesses for resilience and to really tap into what is coming, to engage and to start the conversation so that we can start to assist you. So this is not something that we stand on a pedestal and preach to our clients. It's something that we live as Mazars, and you will see much of what I've been talking about now is captured in these 4 pillars that are coming out strong and emanating from our brand relaunch that has happened last month. But certainly, looking from a different perspective, what does social conscious mean for our businesses, and how do we bring this into the expertise that we have, but most importantly, make it a seamless integration. So it has been such a pleasure to kind of like share the journey that we have taken, and to actually map out the possibilities also for your business from a holistic ESG perspective. So I'm looking forward to some of the questions that are coming from you. And I'm looking forward to an engagement towards the end of the conversation. As I wrap things up now, I would only finalize the conversation and say the time to start on an integrated ESG model for your business is now. It's never been more urgent, and it's never made such sense as that we sit on right now. So the good thing that we have is that we do not have to do it alone, and we have got the ability to tap into those expertise and fully flesh this out for our businesses. And the future that we are looking at and what we anticipate is a path whereby, as we stand right now, we start with what we have, and we start with what is available to our businesses, and we co-create towards sharpening what our value proposition in meeting and reaching our goals. So kindly, I'm going to hand back over to Carl, who will give us the clue between the 2 presentations before we proceed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bongiwe. Is that my echo? That was really excellent. Thank you very much. Reinforced so much of what we've been working on the last few years. One of the beautiful things about the presentation you've just given is that I've been able to see how that conversation has changed over the last few years, from being largely academic, and we know we've been doing this for a while. The case exists, and explaining all of those benefits of ESG Apologies, guys, I was on mute. Thank you, Bongiwe. That was really great. The beauty of what you were saying there for me was that we've been able to see how this conversation has changed over the last few years. It's such a pleasure to watch what was largely an academic discussion a couple of years ago, and how we knew the benefits of ESG, but now that we're able to demonstrate with companies that have engaged with ESG properly over the last few years and reaped real bottom line benefits as a result. It just means that we can achieve in a very real way what you mentioned earlier about that behavior change. The example that always springs to mind for me is this Discovery Vitality program, and whether you like that program or not, there's just a net result of so much healthier people existing because of it. And I see ESG as a similar kind of mechanism to get companies to become more healthy, and as a result the planet and society a lot more healthier as well. I loved what you said at the end there. The future is collaborative. We all need a partner. No one can be an expert in everything. And the barriers that existed before simply don't exist anymore, because there are people and institutions that can help us, no matter what level you're at. For me, the ESG conversation has always been very broad, and I'll be the first to admit that I don't specialize enough in the carbon disclosure side of it, which is why I'm particularly interested to listen to what Samuel has to say and how that can be brought in a lot more closer, particularly from a motivational point of view. I always see the carbon taxes as almost being punitive, and it has a place, and it has obviously has goals it set out to achieve. I'd really love to see how that conversation moves more into an integrated ESG approach. So with that, I'd like to introduce Samuel Onsongo, the team leader at Bureau Veritas. Samuel has a degree in physics with over 10 years experience in renewable energy and climate change. He's been trained in CDM verification, QMS in ISO 9001 and EMS in ISO 14001 as a lead auditor. He's been involved in validation and verification of CDM and gold standard projects covering scopes from 1 to 3. Samuel, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. And I would like to take you through what the discourse is when it comes to corporate sustainability, and what Bureau Veritas has been doing over the years when it comes to sustainability. The key driver which we have here is climate change. Climate change is one of those big issues that have taken global attention. You have heard this over the United Nations talk about climate change, even big superpower countries also having a debate on this. It's one of those threats that humankind is facing in this century, and it has been brought to our attention basically through the effects that we have seen from devastating floods and these changing weather patterns that have threatened our food production systems. So these have made created some awareness globally where people need to act when it comes to climate change. And you may ask, what does this have to do with us? Generally, it has been established that our human activities in the past, when we wanted to industrialize, when we were producing goods to meet our needs, also through the consumption of the same goods and services, we have been able to pump a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and this has led to an increase in terms of temperatures, and this the consequence of that is what we now refer to as climate change. So in essence, what we are saying in the past and even currently, we have not been acting sustainably in terms of production of goods and services, in terms of consumption of goods and services. And therefore, the whole debate about sustainability and climate change goes hand in hand, that we can't talk about climate change if we are not talking about sustainability, and we can't talk about sustainability if we are not talking about climate change. Now, it's not about when we need to act. It's not about whether we need to act. All these events that have been there in the news everywhere, the floods that have been broadcast everywhere, the food insecurities, all these issues needs to be addressed. And there has been consensus globally that we all need to act, and we need to act immediately. And the landmark agreement on how we need to act was reached in 2015 in Paris through what is popularly known as the Paris Agreement. And this agreement, from this conversation and consensus, it was agreed that all nations need to put their best foot forward and act to avert a situation whereby the impact of climate change will not be worse than it already is. So here it's not about acting, it's about how do we need to act when it comes to climate change. So South Africa has also committed in terms of how, as a nation, how it's going to act when it comes to climate change, how they are going to reduce the impact of climate change by mitigating the level of emissions. So there is a commitment to that effect, and this is expected to be communicated every 5 years from the global agreement in Paris, which South Africa ratified in 2016. And based on this, one of the actions that South Africa was proposing and has already implemented was the carbon tax. And we are going to see how this impacts you as a business, how all the measures and the global agreement that have been put in place for which South Africa is a signatory, how this is likely to impact you as a business moving forward. Because at this stage, it's all about action, not really discussion. So it's as my colleague Bongio was saying, at this stage, initially we used to leave it to business leaders to show an example when it comes to sustainability. But at this stage and at this point in time, it's not about voluntary actions. Right now, the commitment is there, and we are headed towards compliance push or compliance mechanism. For example, for South Africa, they have already started the first push to ensure that businesses become sustainable, and that is the carbon tax that was launched in 2019. What this means is that businesses that emit beyond a certain limit or threshold that has been defined by law will be expected to pay. So it means businesses that are more sustainable are going to be more competitive than those that are going to ignore this issue of sustainability. So a company, for example, that goes or is operating at a threshold that is below the tax limit will not be able to incur the cost of tax, the carbon tax. But not only the carbon tax, there are other measures that are proposed by the South African government, one of which is the desired emission reduction outcomes that target sectors. Because the agreement South Africa made was to target the whole economy. So there is no business in South Africa that is expected to be left out. So while tax carbon taxes are direct and they target companies that go beyond the threshold. The desired emission reduction outcomes target sectors. So, for example, if you have the energy sector and they are given certain targets, then it's likely that the cost of, say, the energy that businesses greatly depend on for production, for service realization, is likely to go higher. Like currently, South Africa is known to have the cheapest energy because of the coal, availability of coal. So when such a sector is targeted, then it means your cost of energy is going to be higher. And it means a company that is already has a strategy to respond to these regulations and legal requirements will be at a competitive edge compared to a company that will choose to ignore the current discourse. For example, we have worked with one of a telecom company in South Africa. They have chosen, not only because of this carbon tax, but even in the past, they chose to generate their own electricity, which is clean energy for their own consumption. And this has given them a competitive edge over other companies that still rely on the grid for their own energy supply. So it's not only at the local level that there is a push for sustainability, but there is also push from forces outside South Africa. Like developed countries right now have quotas on how much they need to commit, and they have to reduce in terms of emission reductions. They also tend to influence this along the supply chain. So you'll find like a company like us, Bureau Veritas, which has a headquarter in France. Whatever is applicable in France for Bureau Veritas will tend to distribute these along its branches across the world, whereby we are now required to report our emissions, report our water consumption. We are expected to report our electricity consumption. All this is expected from all of us. So this, again, is one of those drivers that is expected to touch businesses across the world, including in South Africa. So we also have other market mechanisms, such as where investors are more aware of the impending challenge that we have, that is climate change. And they have started to report these. It has been happening for a while, like in the Dow Jones sustainability index. Here, companies get to report on their sustainability so that they are more attractive to investors, because investors are now more and more concerned on where they need to put their money. They are not willing to put their money in a company that's not sustainable, because such a company portends more risk than they would put their money to. So these are the big drivers that are driving businesses, and it's now no longer a situation where we need to do it voluntarily. It's about now compliance, and businesses should start thinking of the strategy on how to comply. So compliance, I mean, the strategy, if you look at it for the companies that are already leading the pack, it's quite a journey. It's a journey where you start from where you exist, knowing how much your business contributes, and then coming up with a strategy on how you are going to be sustainable in the end, how you are going to be carbon neutral, if I may put it that way. And this is a journey that starts by you having a strategy as a company on how you are going to comply, first of all, and how you are going to do much more in order to reach a point where you are carbon neutral. And when you talk of being carbon neutral, it's not just about the CO2 that we are measuring. When we look at a carbon footprint, there is a raft of items that are looked at. There is energy consumption, there is water consumption, there is the waste that we generate, there is the supply chain that we engage. So all these tends to influence how a company will eventually become sustainable. So the very start is to understand where you stand as a company and how you are going to ensure that in future you are going to comply, but not only comply, that you're going to be competitive, because a company right now that does not think of sustainability is not likely to be a competitive company tomorrow, because these issues are being addressed globally, they are being addressed at local level, and they are now trickling down into the company level or even up to individual level on how we consume as individuals. So for Bureau Veritas, we can assist you in many ways when you start your journey, from when you want to determine your footprint, or you want to determine how much environmental impact your organization or company is emitting, all the way up to when you want to report, until the point where you are a level where you need to demonstrate that you have reached a level of neutrality, whereby whatever activities that you do have no harm to the environment. That's in terms of Bureau Veritas. And some of the case examples where we have assisted our clients is from company level, where we have been able to assist companies do their carbon assessment and certify the same. From food industry to packaging industry, even to oil and gas companies, we have done that through our affiliate companies. We have also done project assessment, because once you start and commit to reduce your footprint, then it will be expected that you put measures in place. So some companies have chosen to come up with projects, like the example I talked about, where a company chose to start generating its own power, clean power, for the purpose of not only meeting its energy obligations or energy requirements, but also for the purpose of demonstrating that they can reduce carbon emissions as a result. So here you have an added benefit of not only determining your own footprint, but also the opportunity that when you act on these, you are likely to either reduce your energy consumption. In essence, you will end up being more competitive, as opposed to when you choose not to act, because of compliance requirements will eventually catch up on you. Your competitors will definitely go ahead of you when it comes to being competitive. So these are the main factors, climate change being one of them. It will be the biggest driver of sustainability, being driven by global discourse from the United Nations all the way up to country level, where now countries are required to commit to reduce. And as you understand that countries don't run businesses, they provide an environment for businesses to run. So when countries start to put in laws, then these laws are definitely going to impact the businesses that operate. And South Africa is not left out in this regard. With these a few remarks and the discussion here, I know you may be having quite a number of questions that you'd like clarified. I will welcome such questions after I hand over to Carl.
Thank you, Samuel. This is obviously a subject that needs a lot more attention and diving to get proper understanding. I see the question board started filling up during your talk, so there's some questions that we can look forward to. Thank you very much for that chat. I've certainly got a better idea of how it fits into the bigger picture. One of the questions quickly that came up earlier, I think, Bertram, if we can move on to the question board, I can publish it here, is a very basic introductory question worth mentioning though. What is the difference between ESG and CSR? From my perspective, it's a very, very clear difference. It's a corporate social responsibility, really deals with initiatives that companies choose to get involved in, where they see that there's help needed, whereas ESG is very much involved in your business model. How can your business actually address these issues? I think Bongiwe probably has a better, more complete answer on that. Bongiwe, do you want to address that question quickly before we move on?
Thank you, Carl, and really thank you for the question itself. And it's not peculiar to our context in terms of South Africa that question is asked frequently, because corporate social responsibility has somewhat taken center stage in the sustainability conversation. And I really see corporate social responsibility as one of the components of sustainability, whereby it also has to be driven through a decisive strategy, so that the corporate social initiative that a business decides to go with has got to fit in with their business model so that they can unlock value in it. And many a times that when you drive that CSR and you link it with the United Nations SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, that fit in with your business model, you can easily measure it and measure its impact and even use it as a source of future talent. So it's something that's really exciting that I believe in the country has not been put to better use in advancing our impact into the communities and into the outlying stakeholders as a whole. And to neaten that up is something that will be driven through that strategic conversation. And I keep coming back to that, because without that intent, it will happen, but in a more haphazard manner, which is undesired.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to use my position just to selfishly squeeze one of my own questions into Samuel, if you don't mind, Samuel. I'm very interested to know your opinion on carbon pricing, particularly carbon pricing over different regions in the world and also carbon pricing over different industries. I just know that the carbon taxes, I don't know the exact figures right now, but it's roughly $40 per ton kind of is a standardized pricing, but certain industries are certainly a lot more able to bear that kind of pricing, and also certain industries are a lot more guilty of this kind of thing. I'm just curious to know your thoughts on these two dynamics.
Well, carbon pricing, when it comes to different regions, I don't think it will be uniform, because when you look at it and when you look at the globe, different countries have different capabilities, the economies are operating at different levels. So based on the Paris Agreement, it was determined that for some countries, they're expected to do much more than others. And therefore, when it comes to taxing, it will be expected that probably they would want to squeeze more when it comes to taxes than for other countries. And South Africa, being in the category of developing countries, I don't think that they will be able to measure up to, say, a country in Europe where maybe the level of industry and the contributions is much higher than in South Africa. So I don't expect that it will be even. But these will also depend on how different governments look at it. It's fairly understood that for developing countries, they would be expected to take much longer to comply to the Paris Agreement. And therefore, when it comes to taxation, I don't think it will be much more punitive than it would be for a developed country.
And industries, in particular, I'm thinking about agriculture, who can arguably be ascribed a large carbon footprint to, but they're obviously not as guilty as, say, the fuel industry. And if you're looking at a goal of, say, the Paris Climate Accord versus, as you say, punitive behavior change mechanisms, how do you account for different industries being able to offset their behavior in different ways?
Yeah, I know the energy industry will be the first to suffer because they are being known to be one of the biggest contributors historically. When it comes to agriculture, I think from my perspective and opinion, it might not be that because of food security. You might not want to lead to another crisis by having punitive taxes on say agriculture. But for the energy sector, I mean, for power production, probably even transport, this is likely to be impacted more when it comes to carbon taxes.
Fantastic, guys. If you have any questions, please keep dropping them into the question board while we wait for some more. Karen Longley, let me just publish this one. Well done on your initiative and starting the journey. I think the short question there is call us. Bongiwe will definitely be able to guide you in the right direction. Bongiwe, I don't know if you've seen that question, but maybe you want to contribute to that?
Yes, thank you, Carl. And really for an SMME starting the journey, for us, it's quite imperative because we know, we've heard economically and otherwise, how the SMMEs are actually the important engine in our rebuild period towards, putting our economy on the front foot again. So what we've done is that we've, with Kudos One, Carl here, developed a end-to-end, our ESG assessment. This is the perfect way to start. It's low cost. It's fully taking questions and comparative studies from the best and most pertinent frameworks globally, and reducing it into a format that is understandable for interpretation for SMMEs to know at the end of it all, what am I going to get? I'm going to get clarity as to which United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are impacted by my business activity. I'm also going to know what are my fundamental gaps in terms of environmental, social, and governance aspects. And all of this is driven through a digital portal that will probably, if it's done at the right level, I saw the questions are saying I'm also a director in the business, perfect person to be able to interface with this diagnostic. And quite light in terms of the time effect. The report is published. The gaps are also quite informative to tell you, this is the recommendation. This is why it's important. This is the value it adds to your business. That will kickstart your journey in terms of SMME. I think that what has been incredible for us to achieve is to bring that cost down, pack it with meaning, and amplify it with value, but understanding and hand-holding all the way through. So for SMMEs, that is fabulous news, because we always run the risk of thinking that an ESG conversation is a private school conversation that's not really talking to an unlisted business and does not have the ability to add value. So from that context and the ability to actually quite pertinently and practically launch something like that is one of the most exciting things that we have done in 2020. So please feel free to reach out.
Absolutely, Bongiwe, thank you. I'll just add to that if we think about the goals that we're trying to achieve through ESG integration or reporting or sustainability carbon, what we're trying to achieve, and at the moment maybe making progress on, is largely through the listed sector, because there are regulatory mechanisms for us to achieve those things. When you consider then that SMEs represent up to 80% of the activity in Africa, certainly on our continent, 80% of the economic activity is driven by SMEs. And if you don't come up with a lever or some sort of driver for them to engage and remove those boundaries, you're missing out on a massive opportunity to actually affect change. So people like Karen who are starting to engage, that's fantastic, and that's exactly how we're going to be able to achieve those large growth curves. It unfortunately is falling on me to point out that we've run out of time. This is clearly a very, very interesting and deep conversation. We'll probably look at hosting a few more of these. I want to thank Samuel for joining us this morning. Very informative. Thank you very much, Samuel. We'll definitely be talking to you in the future. Bongiwe, thank you so much for sharing your time and for inviting me to be here as well. It was an absolute pleasure. We will be, I stand to be corrected, but I think we will be sharing the slides and communicating with all the people who joined us this morning afterwards. So thank you very much, and you'll certainly be hearing from us.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.